For professional advice with a personal touch, consult FL Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Good evening. Welcome to today's Entrepreneur, a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. My name is Dan Delmar, along with FL Montreal's Josh Miller. Good evening, Josh.
Hello, Dan.
And this evening on the program, we love having people who make booze in studio.
Cheers to you, Dan.
So we're very proud to have Joanne Gaudreau and Paul Cirka of Cirka Distilleries on the program. They make some very interesting premium spirits right here in Montreal.
Right here in Montreal, vodka, gin, whiskey. And we might be sampling some during the program, so we can definitely tell you all about that.
Later in the show, we'll talk to FL tax partner Ernie Furt about rules on importing, exporting, and just generally doing business abroad. So that is on the way. But first, as usual, entrepreneurial news and notes of the week. Let's begin with something we've talked about in recent weeks, and about social media and how a lot of social media activity is being wasted online, and businesses are sinking a lot of big dollars into their social media, and especially in 2017, not getting a whole lot out of it. Here's why. There's two separate news items coming out today. One, an Oxford study out of the UK finding that Donald Trump supporters, are really monopolizing a lot of the junk news that's out there on social media more than any other political group combined. So it's not just, an annoyance with Trump that we all have a little bit in various degrees. It's actually a phenomenon. They're taking up a lot of space online, and they're taking away your space as advertisers.
Well, that's it. So then businesses, no matter how small or how large, if you want to get out there in social media, if there's a lot more noise out there, then your ultimate customers might stop tuning in.
Yep. And this is why, story number 2 from today, Unilever, one of the largest corporations in the world, one of the largest advertisers, threatening to pull their ads from Google and Facebook, saying that they have become, quote, a swamp of fake news, racism, sexism, and various offensive opinions, and their messages aren't getting through either. So that's pretty big.
Interesting. Although, people want that crazy news. They kind of thrive on it. It's like watching a car crash, yet it's affecting business big time. So I wonder who will win on that battle.
Yep, so that's interesting to follow about how the sort of online advertising game is playing out.
It's almost like the Instagrams of the world, that are more based on photos, and ultimately that will lose out too. But certainly the new social media aspects, new social media platforms, or newer ones, not new ones, might win out, or you might have to be a little bit more selective about them.
A little bit more creative too in how you try to get attention, because if you're sort of competing against people with $100 million budgets, it's really hard to get your message across. Some news and notes now. Big news out from Scotiabank. They are buying a pretty big investment firm for nearly $1 billion.
Jarislowsky Fraser, that a lot of people know, an investment firm, certainly a pillar in the Montreal community. $950 million, I think, that Scotiabank is buying. But I believe that, that this story is really about consolidation. It's about acquisitions. It's about the little guy going to compete. And we've said this before in the program, where all the big peoples are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The Facebooks that are buying those other social media platforms, and it's what can the little guy do to compete? The reality is, if you can highlight, if you can find something that differentiates you, if you can give your personalized service, then that's what will ultimately, you have to develop some type of trust. You have to develop some type of why factor, what to go to. So just be aware that the big guys are getting bigger. So the little guys, if you're going to offer service, and I'm not necessarily saying in the investment field, but in any industry, you just have to make yourself very relevant, rather unique. Almost, nobody states the obvious, yet sometimes you need to state the obvious to show that you're doing it as well. So find the ways to compete with the big boys.
We haven't really talked about cryptocurrencies on the show yet, but this is something that applies to many entrepreneurs. So online digital currencies like Bitcoin. Mixed reaction, I think, from investors. Certainly a lot of institutional investors are shying away from it, and Goldman Sachs is saying recently that they are not optimistic about cryptocurrencies.
No, they're not. And actually, Dan, I spoke about it on the program where we missed you for the week, and I focused quite a bit on Bitcoin. That was when the Bitcoin was at this huge high. It was at $21,000. Now, it dropped down last week down to just below $6,000. It's now closer to $8,000, $9,000. The question is, what is it based on? What is, and what Goldman Sachs is saying is that essentially there's not enough substance to the currency. And they're not referring to blockchain. Blockchain is a different animal. Blockchain is more of, for want of a better term, it's more of a tracking mechanism, more of an auditing, a trail system. But the cryptocurrencies, and there are hundreds of cryptocurrencies out there. What do they base their value on? It truly, I believe personally, this is very much a shot in the dark almost, certainly with the hundreds of them. Yes, has Bitcoin done a little better? Has Ethereum done better? Litecoin is starting to gain a little bit. But the question is, what's basing it, and where is it really going, and what can you put your fingers on? There is a use for it. There's no doubt it is the trend today. But we also saw it go from a few $100s to $21,000 over a very short period of time, and then we saw it go from and a short period of time meaning year and a half, and then we see it going from 21,000 to 6,000 in a few weeks. So it's quite volatile, and the basis for it is still rather unknown. Now, Bitcoin has a limited number of coins that you can actually get, so there might be a supply and demand issue at some point. I don't know if we're there yet.
Are there any businesses, maybe even the tech industry, who might be who might consider accepting Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies?
Well, I think it's I think it'll be the industries where the mainstream financial institutions don't want to get into. I read another article that it's a porn business, or not, or call it products that would please the soul or beyond. We'll leave it at that. That can't get their financing from regular financial institutions. They can't go get, banks won't start financing sex toys, for example. Yet maybe the people that own their Bitcoin, maybe the people that are owning this cryptocurrency, they'll be a little bit more inclined to invest in some of the outlier type industries. They're certainly, they call it cryptocurrency bros in another article I read, where really the cryptocurrency people, they stick together. They look out for each other, and it's not just bros. There's some girls too, although very minimal. I think it's at least 90% men in the crypto field. But it's something that if they're going to take a chance on Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, then they'll probably take a chance on some of the sectors that are a little bit out there.
Finally, one story that could offer some great advice from the Financial Post. 7 things small businesses should learn about retailing today from the pros. It's by Rick Spence, and we can just whiz through some of the points here. The first is relationships. It's all about relationships. And
it's relationships, and Dan, this as well as anybody else. It's not just individual face-to-face. It's relationships online. It's an entire management of all your relationships and all your visibility aspects. So it's online, it's in person, it's store experience, it's everything to do about relationships. If you get it right, people will keep coming back.
Put your best foot forward online.
Yeah, that is, again, about relationships, about knowing exactly where you want to be. The reality is most people start shopping digitally, and then they go to the store and feel it out. So if you don't put your best foot forward online, where I believe over 80% of the people start their shopping experience, then you're losing out from day one.
Don't groan at the cost of differentiating.
If you, as we said earlier, the big guys are getting bigger. The only way for the little guy to get ahead is to differentiate yourself, is to create a reason why to come into the store. And if that reason costs a little bit more, better that than losing out sales and closing down.
I'll whiz through them here. A couple of points on really upping your technology for better marketing and also for better consumer engagement.
And really, we had Stefanka Technologies on a little while ago, and that is an in-store experience. It's body size. It's matching, what clothes fit your body style. So that is just the beginning of the technology phase.
And finally, upgrade your values and your culture.
people want to buy what they believe in. So if they want to buy, if they believe in your culture, if they believe in your values, if they believe that you are giving back to the community or being corporate social responsibility, they will come into your store. Never discount that factor.
Yep. Studies show millennials insist on that, actually, when they talk about their brands. Coming up next, we'll chat with the folks from Cirka Distilleries, Joanne Gaudreau and Paul Cirka, and about their local booze-making operation that is on the way.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult FL Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Inspiring stories from outstanding business people. Dan Delmore and FL Montreal's Josh Miller with you on today's Entrepreneur. And this evening, we're going to chat with Joanne Gaudreau and Paul Cirka of Cirka Distilleries. Joanne and Paul, welcome to CJD.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Nice to be here.
So, a young local distillery. You guys make premium spirits right here in Montreal. How did this start? Tell me about Cirka Distilleries.
Well, first of all, I love the fact that you called us young.
It's radio. You can sound as young
I
as you
think they were
want.
talking about the company.
I've been looking at distilling for quite some time. I'm more of a spirits drinker. I started my life in high tech and caught my breath, took a little bit of time off and went, okay, what do I want to do? If you want to be a baker, you have to wake up way too early. And I figured...
And if you want to be a distiller, you want to go to bed way too late.
Exactly. So that kind of suited me. I mean, I certainly had an aha moment with a beautiful whiskey made by Kaulila about 20 years ago. And that probably stuck with me. Somewhere in the back of my mind, it planted an idea. I don't know if that's where things start. And so I just started researching different options and ideas and found this thing called craft distilling. I mean, at the time when I looked at the market, there were less than 200 craft distillers in the U.S. Now there's 1,700. So it's been a big boon south of the border. Canada, we're a little bit slower on the uptick. I mean, things are move a little bit
as we usually tend to be.
We're a little more conservative. Well, part of it is, and it's not just this industry, every industry. I mean, investments, startups, entrepreneurship in Canada, although we have amazing ideas, sometimes funding of those is a little bit difficult to come on. So,
So when you, and maybe before we get there, let's let the listener know. So Cirka Distilleries, what type of product do you make? What are the various products?
Yeah, so we're a spirits company and as a distillery, and so we started off with really the idea of becoming a significant whiskey distillery. That was the kind of goal. However, in Canada, you have to lay down whiskey and let it sit for a minimum of 3 years by law. And so in the meantime, we went, let's show the market that we know how to make great products. And so we moved into white spirit. So currently we make 2 different gins, award-winning, beautiful products, and also a vodka. Our vodka is the first grain-to-bottle vodka actually in Quebec. So we're a true grain-to-bottle distillery. We source our raw materials from farmers here in Quebec. It's very important for us to express the terroir. I mean, we have amazing raw materials. We have access to incredible raw materials here in Quebec, whether it's botanicals from the boreal forest, whether it's grains grown right here in Quebec.
How long does it take how long did it take you to get to that right recipe for the various products, whether it was the vodka, whether it was 2 gins? Is there a certain number of recipes like, okay, I got to my 30th one and that was it?
Yeah, you don't know what that number is. I mean, you would think that vodka, which is a single ingredient, should be pretty easy. But when you're grain to bottle, you have high standards. It took us probably well over 6 months to develop the technique in making our vodka. I mean, we put a lot of care into it, whether it's from the selection of yeast that gets married with the grain. I mean, in that case, we use a champagne yeast because it throws off exactly the flavors that we want. Getting to know your equipment, your still, you can make a product various different ways. So that was about 6 months just for us to make the vodka, and as long to do the gin recipe as well.
Did it require a lot of special equipment when you first started?
Absolutely. I mean, distilling is a specialized manufacturing process. So it requires a permit, a license, both from the federal and the provincial governments here. In Quebec, particularly, there are a number of hurdles that you have to get over. It's an industrial operation.
Well, there's no question the SAQ comes into play, but we'll talk about that a little later. We'll talk about that a little later. But certainly from a finance aspect, just quickly, is it love money? Did the banks believe in you? How did you kind of get money in there?
I mean, I'm sure you've had a lot of startups on here where they go, look, trying to convince an institution that they should part with their money with a company or a group of individuals that have no history, except possibly their background is not easy. So we were fortunate. I mean, between Joanne, our third partner, who likes to call himself a silent partner, but he's Italian, so you can't be silent. You cannot
He's silent tonight.
You cannot be that silent. Together with our own financing, the banks believed in the project enough, and we were lucky enough to get some funding from BDC as well. So
listen, that's definitely a different aspect. But then it's about making it, but it's also about marketing it. It's also about getting on board. It's also about getting the SAQ. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and Joanne's going to speak her piece so that she cuts off
Love
Paul.
to share that.
Paul Cirka and Joanne Gaudreau join us from Cirka Distilleries, and coming up, we'll also speak to FL tax partner Ernie Furt about the perils of importing, exporting, and just generally doing business abroad.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult FL Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Welcome back to today's Entrepreneur, a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. My name is Dan Delmar, along with FL Montreal's Josh Miller, and this evening we're chatting with Paul Cirka and Joanne Gaudreau of Cirka Distilleries, a local distillery based right here in Montreal, just a few years old. And let's start. We have heard from Paul, who's really had a real passion about distilling. Joanne, your passion is business. So how did you get involved in Cirka?
Actually, my passion is marketing, which I guess is related to business in one way or another. Friends for 20 years, Paul and I really decided to, jump into this project together. I read the business plan, fell in love with the idea of the project, and just decided to leave my old world behind. And I've had an entrepreneurial spirit for a really, really long time. So this just felt like the right time, and it felt like the right project. And one thing led to another.
So let's talk about marketing of Cirka. You're a new product on the market. How do you get people to know who you are?
It's not easy when you're competing against people with very, very deep pockets. We know what a competitive world this is. It really starts with word of mouth and grassroots marketing. I mean, when you're starting out, that's pretty much what you've got to work with. So we started with a community of 4. We've now built it up to over 5,000 on Facebook. And, we work a lot with press. We work a lot with ambassadors and mixologists who really, truly love the product and believe in what we're doing. And they've become our ambassadors.
So I know the consumer buys your product today, but did you get it through kind of the restaurants, the wholesale? Like, you kind of go to business first?
Yeah, that was our initial go-to-market. We really decided that we wanted to focus on B2B and kind of work with bars and restaurants first. And, these are mixologists who have a talent to transform what we've transformed into a beautiful cocktail. And they're in the face of the consumer all the time. And they have a sophisticated palate. And we decided to work with them. We got some feedback on the product, in the initial stages, so we engaged them quite a lot. And so many of them just became our ambassadors for the love of the project and for the love of the product. So it's very important to have that kind of community behind you.
Well, every now and then I like to think I have a sophisticated palate. So as I'm sipping there, I'm sipping the Cirka gin, I happen to like it very much. Not that I drink that often. Hey,
see, you've just become an ambassador now.
So right now, an ambassador for the Cirka product. Excellent. What about online? What about social media? Does that
critical,
work for you guys?
Absolutely critical. So social media is really about telling a story, and it's ongoing. And I remember back in the day where the press release was the be all and end all. And I think communications have changed quite a lot. And we've engaged, people just by telling our story. And, one of the first postings was really the arrival of our equipment. And, the installation and the fact that we were pouring cement on the floor, just kind of getting the building ready to go. So,
you say storytelling, and storytelling is definitely something, and Dan, I'm sure you'll concur, the way to get your message across, the way to get people engaged. So storytelling, did you make that as really part of your plan for marketing? As forget about just giving the name and whatever. We're going to tell the story so people feel more connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, nothing is made up, or we don't have an editorial calendar. I mean, things just happen the way they do, and we share what we feel, the community is interested in.
See, my heart skipped a beat there when she said we have no editorial calendar, which is something that we really tell clients not to do, because it should be organic and it should feel natural.
It's just not authentic, right? And I mean,
that's not the gin talking, Dan.
No, it's not. Well done.
Yeah, so, when things are overly planned, they sound a little too contrived.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, you are an alcohol distillery company in Quebec. The SAQ, Société des Alcools du Québec, has to come into play. You must distribute your product in Quebec. How was that experience? How long did it take you to get in? I'm sure there's a story behind it. I understand it can take a while, but they can be helpful. Tell us.
Well, it's our one and only client in Quebec. Same way the LCBO will be our one and only client in Ontario. So, the idea was to work in parallel, where you become a private import initially when you're dealing with the B2B space. And then you're applying to be on the shelf. So it works with a tender. And those things happen in parallel. And it can take a while. It took 8 months for us to get onto the shelf.
There's tasting. They have to make sure your product is good enough for them, or
there's an offer. There's tastings as well. There's analysis.
There's an initial process that you kind of have to go through, and I mean the SAQ is recognized around the world for their standard. I mean their lab is exceptional with respect to maintaining quality assurance, and they're recognized for that.
But it makes it that much harder to get in, which is, I guess, a good and bad thing.
Exactly.
It filters out quality.
It's a double-edged sword, for sure. So once you're past that hurdle, then you're into the system. And as a small producer, I guess your challenges are to understand how this system works. I mean, the SAQ is a sophisticated retail organization.
It sounded like it takes a while, but at the end of the day, did they work with you?
Yes.
I mean, there may have been roadblocks getting there, but at the end of the day, did they work with you to try and get your product on the shelf?
There were some roadblocks initially, because I mean, we were talking about the vodka earlier, and the vodka initially had a different profile, and it's the first craft vodka out of Quebec. So when you're comparing that to industrial vodkas, the profile is very different. As such, we had a bit of a snag initially with the vodka designation, but they did work with us, and they wanted to understand, and they wanted to educate themselves, and they're working closely with craft distillers right now to try to get, those products out on the shelf as quickly as they can.
At the end of the day, you kind of work together, and you may have educated them a little bit as well.
Well, I think we're educating each other. I mean, we're all learning about this new world of craft. So, it's working out in their favor, because they're carrying very interesting products right now, and it's working out in our favor as well.
It's I'm sure there's a lot to tell about the story, and we only got a glimpse, but it's been great so far.
Joanne and Paul, they will also stick around to tell us what their one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur is. That is on the way. Plus, FL Tax partner Ernie Furt on the perils of importing and exporting. That is next.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult FL Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Inspiring stories from outstanding business people. Dan Delmar and FL's Josh Miller with you for today's entrepreneur. And joining us is Joanne Gaudreau and Paul Cirka of Cirka Distilleries. We'll have their one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur in just a few moments. But first, FL Tax partner Ernie Furt is back here, and he is going to stop by again to talk about imports, exports, and doing business abroad.
And no doubt, it's a minefield. And when people are exporting and even importing and dealing, whether it's royalties, whether it's paying sales reps, across the border or other places in the world, there's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of misunderstandings. What are some of the first things that come to mind, Ernie, when you're talking about that import-export aspect of business?
Well, the first thing that you have to do is if you're exporting or importing, you got to contact an expert in the other country. You got to contact an accountant, somebody who can help you with your business in the destination country. If you work through a customs broker and they'll help you import the stuff, they'll say you're registered for everything, but in reality you're not. You're registered for import-export, which is what they care about. Another thing you have to watch out with customs brokers is you have to actually engage with them, ensure that your product is classified properly for duty, because those audits are disgusting. They take a long time, and they're very expensive because there's very, very few duty experts out there who know what the rate is, what the composition of the material is, and it's important that you surround yourself with proper experts when you go country to country.
Now, from a Canadian standpoint, at least for now, we deal mostly with the U.S., and we won't get into the NAFTA discussions, but we deal mostly with the U.S. So from a Canada-U.S. standpoint, are there certain challenges or little tips, little maybe misgivings that you hear that entrepreneurs should be aware of?
Well, the U.S. does a lot of sales tax differently. They tax on a state-by-state basis as opposed to Canada, which effectively has a national sales tax. A lot of people read stuff on the internet that say, well, if you don't have any connection with the state or you're not in the state, you don't have physical presence in the state, you're not subject to sales tax.
This is the concept of nexus.
That's the concept of nexus, which just means a connection with, effectively. So what you have to do is you have to look at these nexus standards, and each state has different nexus standards. Take your top 10 states that you export to, take a look at those things, and make sure you don't fall off the table, because effectively, if you're selling B2C, then you have no opportunity to get back that money if you make a mistake.
And again, it's every state, like every province has its own, yes, there's HST, but every state has their own sales tax rules and regulations.
Yes.
What if you ignore them? What happens?
If you get caught, then they'll send you a questionnaire. They'll send you a nexus questionnaire, because stuff gets imported into the state. They know that stuff gets imported in the state because they look at customs documents and they look at sales documents. They see where stuff is sold to.
That's actually the question, is where entrepreneurs, sometimes they don't realize that these various government departments are actually looking at documents. Who looks at these things?
There's a bunch of little people in each state that look at these documents. Every state needs money. So because they need money, they look at stuff that comes into the state. They look at trucks crossing borders. They look at your own truck. They see the name. They want to see if it's registered in the New Jersey registry. It's not. Okay, stop truck. What's going on?
Are there states that are a little easier to work with, or maybe don't have certain taxes?
The states that are easier to work with are the ones that don't charge any sales tax.
Which ones?
I don't know them all. There's like 7. Okay,
a couple of them.
I think New Hampshire doesn't charge a sales tax.
Oh yeah, live free or die. Sure they
Delaware?
don't charge sales tax.
No,
maybe.
I think Delaware might. No.
There's all the states that don't charge sales tax have small populations. I remember that when I looked at it the last time. The big states all charge sales tax, and they're all mean and they're hard to deal with. Certain states have voluntary disclosure processes. Others do not. They change. you have to be very careful when you get into the states and go in from state to state.
So let's talk about quickly about you're dealing with countries around the world, or with states or not, and you have a sales rep and you're paying them. Challenges there. I mean, do you have to worry about how you're paying them and what you're withholding and all that?
Depending on the country, you have to take a look at the treaty between, let's assume, Canada and that destination country. And you have to look at the powers of the individual. Does that individual have the power to contract on your behalf?
Meaning a sales rep.
A sales rep. Does he have the full power to contract? Or is he simply working with a price list and he can deviate just a small percentage away, and any real deviations have to be approved by Home Office? So maybe, depending on the country, that doesn't create nexus/permanent establishment, i.e. a taxing jurisdiction.
If you have a showroom, if Cirka Distilleries wants to have a Cirka Distilleries showroom, they want to display their product at a trade show or somewhere in the States, does the showroom itself mean that you have a permanent establishment?
Not necessarily, but it depends.
Never black and white.
No, it isn't black and white, because for federal purposes, the law is the treaty. States don't follow the treaty. New York, if you go to a show on an annual basis, they could deem that you have nexus and you have to file a New York State return.
There's so many more questions that we have around this table. We can't get to them all, but thanks very much, Ernie. I know it's a minefield, and everybody has to make their way through it. And as we approach the last moment of our show, I guess we'll turn to Paul and Joanne and ask you guys, what would be your one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur? Joanne?
Well, there's days where you're going to feel beaten up, and
this is not a Harvey Weinstein.
No, but really, you're going to feel like you're really beaten up, and you're going to have to keep smiling. And I know it's tough on certain days, but you're going to have a sense of humor about it all, because it's all about resiliency and moving forward.
It does help when there's alcohol involved.
That helps too.
Paul, what would you say? What would be your one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur?
I mean, this is going to sound incredibly corny, but you really do have to believe in yourself. You have to believe that you can reach that goal line, no matter what hurdles you've got in front of you.
We've had a few of them.
Yeah. I mean, they come up every day.
Yeah.
I mean, you're constantly dealing with challenge.
And they move the goal line too sometimes.
All the time.
All the time. And if you lose faith in yourself, you will never get there.
Excellent. Thanks very much, guys. Dan, my quick takeaway, and I know it's radio, so we can't see, but the joke that was made earlier about Paul talking about his age is more about, you're never too late to start with your next best, great, passionate idea. Yes. So entrepreneurs, doesn't matter how old you are, if you have it, go for it.
Joanne Gaudreau and Paul Cirka of Cirka Distilleries, thanks so much for stopping by, and best
Thanks
of luck,
for
guys.
having us. Thank you.
And thanks to Ernie Furt as well at FL, and back here next Monday night at 7 p.m. here on News Talk Radio, CJAD 800.